The collapse begins the moment God withdraws his restraint. The narcissist is not destroyed by people. They are destroyed the moment God steps back. For a long time, restraint protected them, not because they were right, not because they were innocent, but because judgment was delayed. Doors opened when they should have closed. People tolerated what should have ended. Consequences softened when they should have struck. The narcissist mistook restraint for approval. They believed uninterrupted progress meant immunity. They assumed silence meant disengagement. They concluded that because nothing happened, nothing would. They were wrong. The moment God withdraws restraint, the narcissist does not fall publicly. They lose coherence. Their inner structure begins to fracture. What once worked effortlessly now fails without explanation. Their words no longer land. Their authority sounds hollow. Their confidence feels forced. They push harder and get less. They manipulate more and expose themselves faster. They demand compliance and meet resistance. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, and everything has already changed. Because God is no longer holding together what was built on violation. This is not punishment imposed from outside. This is protection removed. When restraint lifts, distortion can no longer hide behind momentum. Reality stops bending. Truth stops accommodating. The narcissist begins to experience life without the unseen buffer that once absorbed the cost of their behavior. They feel it immediately, though they cannot name it. They call it bad luck. They call it betrayal. They call it stress. But what they are actually experiencing is exposure. God has stopped protecting what should never have been protected. When God is silent with you, but no longer silent with them, God's silence toward you is not neglect. It is release. You are not being tested anymore. You are being removed from the equation. For a long time, your voice mattered too much in the narcissist's world. Your reactions stabilized them. Your explanations softened consequences. Your presence absorbed chaos they could not manage on their own. You were not just a person to them, you were a buffer. And now, that buffer is gone. God did not ask you to leave because you failed. He removed you because your assignment ended. You were never meant to carry the weight of distortion indefinitely. Silence, in your case, is not punishment. It is insulation. It is God saying, "Step back. This no longer requires your endurance." But to the narcissist, silence means something very different. They do not experience silence as peace. They experience it as threat. When you stop responding, their inner world begins to panic, not because they miss you, but because their control loses reference. They depended on your engagement to confirm their narrative. Without it, the story they told themselves has no witness. They replay conversations. They imagine motives. They search for hidden meanings that do not exist. God's silence toward them is not absence. It is pressure without relief. They are being confronted not by accusation, but by emptiness. And emptiness is unbearable to a personality built on constant validation. Where you find stillness, they find instability. Where you feel relief, they feel exposure. They want you to speak not to reconcile, but to re-anchor their reality. Your words once helped them locate themselves as victim, hero, or misunderstood authority. Without your voice, they are left alone with consequence. This is why separation feels violent to them. They will tell themselves, "You changed." They will accuse you of cruelty. They will frame your silence as abandonment. But silence is not abandonment when God commands it. It is containment. God's silence toward you means protection. God's silence toward them means judgment beginning internally. They start to feel watched, not by people, but by truth. Sleep becomes restless. Memory resurfaces. Moments they once dismissed acquire weight, not because anyone is reminding them, but because the scaffolding that once supported denial is no longer reinforced. Nothing needs to be said. Nothing needs to be clarified. Nothing needs to be explained. The process is already in motion, and what makes this moment so destabilizing for the narcissist is that it cannot be negotiated. There is no conversation that reopens grace, no apology that restores distortion, no performance that persuades reality to bend again. God does not require your participation in correction. He requires your absence from it. Any attempt to re-engage would interfere with a process that must unfold without distortion being reintroduced. Compassion at this stage does not look like rescue. It looks like distance. Distance allows order to reassert itself without interruption. This is why your silence carries authority now. It is not passive. It is obedient. You are not stepping away because you are weak. You are stepping away because God has taken over. The narcissist cannot locate the source of their discomfort because the source is not a person, it is the loss of distortion. When manipulation no longer bends reality in their favor, reality itself becomes threatening. They are forced to face consequence without a villain to blame. And this is where confusion replaces confidence. They escalate. They overreach. They attempt to regain control through pressure, charm, or intimidation. But every attempt fails faster than the last. Because God is no longer silent with them, He is silent to them. And silence, when grace has been withdrawn, is not empty. It is charged. God's fury is not loud. It dismantles from the inside. God's fury does not announce itself with noise. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not seek witnesses. What begins to happen inside the narcissist is not dramatic collapse, but something far more terrifying to them: loss of internal command. The machinery that once ran smoothly begins to grind. Thoughts lose coherence, confidence fractures, certainty erodes. They do not feel punished. They feel unsettled. Their mind no longer cooperates the way it used to. The inner voice that once justified everything grows unreliable. The narratives that protected them begin to contradict each other. What they once dismissed resurfaces without permission. God's fury does not strike the body first. It reaches the inner architecture. Sleep becomes uneasy. Stillness becomes threatening. Silence feels crowded. Not with voices, but with memory. Moments they believed were buried return with clarity. Words they minimized acquire weight. Actions once rationalized now refuse to stay small. There is no accuser present, yet they feel indicted. This is not guilt imposed. This is conscience reactivated. For a narcissist, this is devastating. Their survival depended on fragmentation, on never seeing themselves whole. But when God removes distortion, fragmentation collapses. Pieces reconnect. Cause and effect realign. Time becomes continuous instead of compartmentalized. They begin to experience accountability without a face. They feel watched, yet no one is watching. They feel pursued, yet no one is chasing them. They feel exposed, yet nothing has been revealed publicly. What they are encountering is truth functioning without interference. God's fury at this stage is not rage. It is resolve. Resolve that distortion will no longer be permitted to masquerade as normal. Resolve that reality will no longer bend to protect a personality built on violation. Resolve that the inner lies must collapse before the outer life can be corrected. This is why the process feels relentless. There is no single problem to solve, no enemy to confront, no explanation that stabilizes the discomfort. Every attempt to regain control produces another fracture. Every effort to reassert dominance exposes further instability. They escalate tactics, sharper manipulation, louder justification, rehearsed remorse, and each escalation accelerates the unraveling. Because God's fury does not respond to performance. It responds to pattern. And when harm becomes patterned, when distortion becomes habitual, when truth is repeatedly violated to preserve control, God does not argue, he reorders. The narcissist experiences this as chaos. In reality, it is alignment returning. What once required little effort now demands everything. Relationships no longer cushion them. Circumstances no longer adjust to protect their image. Familiar strategies stop producing predictable outcomes. They blame stress. They blame bad timing. They blame other people. But nothing external has turned against them. Reality has stopped cooperating with falsehood. This is why the destruction is internal first. God dismantles the control center. Without internal coherence, nothing external can hold. Influence fades, authority rings hollow, presence loses gravity. They are not losing things yet. They are losing command. And to a narcissist, losing command is worse than losing possessions. This is also why your absence is so critical at this stage. Any engagement would provide resistance for them to push against. Any response would offer a target for blame. God removes the innocent, so the guilty cannot externalize the reckoning. You are not witnessing their suffering because you caused it. You are witnessing it because you are no longer stabilizing it. The fury of God here is precise. It strips away the illusion of mastery. It exposes the limits of manipulation. It forces the narcissist to inhabit the world as it actually is, not as they distorted it to be. And reality, unbent, is unbearable to a personality built on control. They begin to realize slowly, painfully, that nothing they do restores the old equilibrium. No apology resets distortion. No charm reopens grace. No intimidation forces alignment back into submission. The process does not need your approval. It does not require your presence. It cannot be interrupted by explanation. It moves forward with the quiet authority of order reclaiming itself. And once God's fury takes this form, it does not retreat. The narcissist collapses when there is no one left to reflect them. The narcissist does not know who they are. They never did. What they knew was how to see themselves through others, through admiration, through fear, through compliance, through emotional reactions they could provoke and control. Their identity was never internal, it was borrowed. You were not simply a person in their life, you were a mirror. Your attention reflected significance. Your reactions confirmed power. Your explanations stabilized their narrative. As long as someone remained in position to reflect them, the narcissist could function, not heal function, not grow, perform. Their sense of self depended on an audience willing, knowingly or not, to hold the mirror steady. When God removed you, he did not remove affection, he removed reflection. And without reflection, the narcissist begins to unravel. At first, they do not recognize what is happening. They assume the discomfort is temporary. They search for replacements. They seek new people, new environments, new roles where the mirror might be restored. But something has changed. The reflection no longer works. New people hesitate. New relationships resist depth. New environments do not respond with the same compliance. Because what was removed was not you alone, it was permission. God does not allow the mirror to be rebuilt so easily. The narcissist can still speak, still charm, still posture. But the image no longer holds. Their words fall flat. Their presence lacks gravity. Their authority feels staged. They begin to panic. Without reflection, the narcissist cannot maintain the illusion of coherence. They feel themselves fragmenting, not because anyone is attacking them, but because there is no longer a surface to hold their projected self together. This is why their behavior becomes erratic. They oscillate between arrogance and collapse, between grandiosity and despair. between intimidation and self-pity. They are trying to force reflection back into existence. They provoke reactions. They manufacture conflict. They exaggerate narratives. Any reaction will do admiration or outrage, because reaction confirms existence. But what they encounter instead is indifference, distance, silence, boundaries that do not explain themselves. And this is intolerable. The narcissist experiences this as annihilation, not because they are being erased, but because they are being unmasked. Without a mirror, the false self has nothing to project onto. They are left alone with an internal emptiness they never develop the capacity to face. This is where self-destruction accelerates. They make reckless decisions to feel powerful again. They overplay their hand. They say too much. They expose motives they once concealed. What once felt calculated now feels desperate. Their attempts to reclaim dominance only reveal the fragility beneath it. They are no longer managing perception, they are chasing it. And chasing always reveals dependence. This is also why the collapse appears self-inflicted. From the outside, it looks as though they are sabotaging themselves, and they are, but not consciously. They are reacting to the terror of existing without reflection. God does not need to punish them externally. He allows them to face themselves internally. For someone whose identity was built entirely on external validation, that confrontation is unbearable. They try to escape it through activity, noise, escalation, drama, but the emptiness follows them. It does not respond to movement, because emptiness is not situational. It is structural. You did not cause this collapse by leaving. You revealed it by no longer reflecting. This is why your absence feels so threatening to them. You were not just someone they lost. You were the surface that made their false self appear real. Without you, the illusion cannot sustain itself. And this is the moment where self-destruction becomes inevitable. Not because they are being attacked, not because they are being judged publicly, but because they are being left alone with a self that was never built to stand. God's justice here is exact. He does not destroy the narcissist by force. He removes the mirror and lets the false self collapse under its own weight. Their judgment reveals itself through a chain of disastrous decisions. The narcissist does not collapse all at once. They unravel decision by decision. This is how divine judgment becomes visible, not through catastrophe, but through a sudden loss of discernment. Choices that once seemed calculated now feel impulsive. Moves that once looked strategic now appear reckless. What they decide begins to work against them. They still believe they are in control. That is the deception that finishes them. God does not remove their ability to choose. He removes clarity. And without clarity, every decision accelerates the fall. They sign what they should have questioned. They trust who they should have tested. They speak when silence would have protected them. They stay when they should have left. They leave when they should have stayed. Each decision feels reasonable in the moment. Each decision compounds damage afterward. This is not stupidity. It is wisdom withdrawn. Scripture is clear. Wisdom is not guaranteed. It is given. And when wisdom is misused to violate others, it is not destroyed. It is taken back. The narcissist begins operating on confidence alone, and confidence without wisdom becomes arrogance. Arrogance always overreaches. They overestimate their influence. They misjudge loyalty. They assume access still exists where it has already been revoked. They make public moves based on private assumptions that are no longer true. They expose themselves without realizing it. They believe they are tightening control while actually loosening it. And they do this repeatedly, because judgment at this level is cumulative. One bad decision does not end them. A pattern of bad decisions does. Each choice closes a door they will need later. Each miscalculation isolates them further. Each reaction hardens the resistance around them. They feel trapped by circumstances, but the trap is internal. They cannot slow down long enough to reassess, because slowing down would require facing reality, and reality is now hostile to distortion. This is where desperation sharpens. They begin to gamble instead of plan. They escalate instead of reflect. They force outcomes instead of allowing alignment. And forcing always exposes weakness. From the outside, it looks chaotic. From a spiritual perspective, it is precise. God is allowing them to choose without restraint. No correction interrupts them. No warning stops them. No mercy cushions the impact. They are free to decide, and therefore fully responsible for the consequences of those decisions. This is why their collapse feels self-inflicted. They will tell themselves they were betrayed. They will insist others sabotaged them. They will accuse circumstances of turning unfair. But the truth is simpler and far more devastating. They are choosing without wisdom, and choice without wisdom always destroys the chooser. This is also why no one can rescue them now. Advice fails. Intervention backfires. Every attempt to help becomes another decision they twist into error. The system no longer allows correction from outside. Because correction is no longer educational, it is judicial. God is not teaching them at this stage. He is letting the record complete itself. Each decision writes another line of evidence. Each action confirms the pattern. Each consequence narrows the remaining options. This is when inevitability becomes visible. They sense it, even if they cannot articulate it. Anxiety rises, urgency increases. They rush choices because stillness would reveal how far they have drifted from truth. But movement cannot outrun judgment, and so they continue deciding, misjudging, escalating until the structure they built on distortion can no longer support the weight of consequence. Not because God struck them down, but because God let them choose freely without protection. You do nothing, because justice does not require witnesses. There comes a moment when action becomes interference, not because injustice is unfinished, but because justice is already moving. At this stage, your involvement is no longer required. Not your words, not your presence, not even your silence as strategy. Your withdrawal is obedience. The narcissist expects resistance. They always have. Opposition gave them shape. Conflict gave them relevance. Reaction gave them energy. They fed on friction, turning even moral confrontation into proof of importance. But justice at this level does not respond to friction. It advances through absence. God does not need you to testify. He does not need you to prove what happened. He does not need you to explain what was done to you. Truth is already operational. This is the moment where doing nothing becomes the most decisive act you will ever make. Not because it is passive, but because it refuses to interfere with a correction that must complete itself without distortion being reintroduced. Any engagement now would give the narcissist something to push against. Any explanation would give them material to manipulate. Any defense would reopen a narrative that has already been closed. Justice does not argue its case. It executes alignment. This is why God removes witnesses before judgment intensifies. Witnesses complicate justice by introducing emotion, perspective, and negotiation. But what is unfolding now does not require understanding. It requires completion. You were not spared to observe. You were spared to be out of reach. Distance is not indifference. It is insulation. God does not ask the innocent to stand near collapsing structures. He separates before he corrects, not to soften consequences, but to ensure they fall where they belong. To the narcissist, your absence feels like cruelty. To heaven, it is containment. They want a response, not reconciliation. They want engagement, not accountability. They want your presence so the reckoning can be redirected. But redirection is no longer possible. The process unfolding does not respond to appeal. It does not slow for remorse that performs but does not surrender. It does not pause for explanations shaped to recover control. Justice at this level is structural. It is reality correcting itself without commentary. This is why silence feels so powerful now. Not because it is dramatic, but because it offers no resistance for manipulation to grip. Silence leaves the narcissist alone with consequence, and consequence does not negotiate. You are not withholding forgiveness. You are withholding interference. There is a difference. Forgiveness is internal. Interference is external. God handles the external. You are responsible only for remaining aligned. This is also why the narcissist escalates when you remain still. They provoke. They accuse. They fabricate urgency. They attempt to force interaction because interaction once restored their footing, but now every attempt collapses faster than the last. Because justice does not require witnesses. It requires space. Space for truth to operate without distortion. Space for consequences to land without being absorbed by someone else. Space for the narcissist to remain with what they have constructed. This is not vengeance. This is restoration of order. And order does not need applause. It does not announce itself. It does not defend itself. It simply proceeds until alignment is restored. Your role now is not to watch closely. It is to stand clear. Stand clear of their panic. Stand clear of their narrative. Stand clear of their attempts to pull you back into a system that is already collapsing. God has taken over the work you were never meant to finish, and once He does, the most faithful response is restraint. The truth spreads, but it does not come from you. Truth does not need a messenger once it is released. At this stage, your voice is no longer required because reality has begun to speak for itself. What the narcissist feared most is now happening without your involvement. Their mask is failing in ordinary daylight, not through exposure campaigns, not through accusations, not through your testimony, through pattern. People begin to notice inconsistencies they once ignored. Promises no longer align with outcomes. Stories shift. Reactions feel disproportionate. The same conflicts repeat with different people. What once could be dismissed as misunderstanding begins to look unmistakably like character. This is how truth spreads when God is involved quietly and irreversibly. The narcissist cannot control this phase because it does not respond to pressure. They attempt damage control, but the timing is off. They explain too much. They justify what no one asked about. They preempt accusations that were never made. And in doing so, they reveal more than they conceal. They try to manage perception, but perception is no longer the issue. What people are responding to now is experience. Repeated contact, familiar patterns, the sense that something always feels wrong around the same individual. No one needs to be warned. Recognition happens organically when distortion loses its cover. This is why the narcissist grows increasingly agitated. They sense the shift, but cannot locate its source. They look for a person to blame, a voice that started this, but there is none. The narrative is dissolving without a narrator. They will accuse you anyway. They will tell themselves you turned people against them. They will insist you planted seeds. They will imagine conversations that never happened. But truth does not require conspiracy. It requires consistency. And consistency is exactly what the narcissist can no longer maintain. As scrutiny increases, even subtly, their performance deteriorates, charm feels forced, authority feels rehearsed. What once passed as confidence now reads as defensiveness. People do not argue, they withdraw. They do not confront, they disengage. Distance spreads faster than confrontation ever could. This is the most damaging outcome for a narcissist. Not public humiliation, but quiet loss of credibility, the slow erosion of trust, the unspoken recalibration of expectations. Doors remain open, but no one walks through them the same way again. They are still present, but they are no longer central. They are heard, but no longer believed. They speak, but their words no longer anchor reality. And because this happens without announcement, they cannot counter it. There is no single accusation to refute, no claim to disprove, no enemy to defeat. What is collapsing is not a reputation, it is authority. Authority collapses when reality no longer supports it. This is also where desperation sharpens. The narcissist attempts to reassert control through intensity. They exaggerate, they dramatize, they escalate tone and urgency to recapture attention. But intensity without integrity repels. The more they press, the more people step back. The more they explain, the more they expose. The more they insist, the less convincing they sound. They are trapped in a paradox of their own making. Silence now harms them more than accusation ever could, because silence leaves space for observation, and observation reveals pattern. This is why you were instructed to remain still. Your restraint prevents distortion from being reintroduced. You are no longer absorbing the confusion that once protected them. Without you stabilizing the environment, reality is free to correct perception naturally. Truth does not need your defense, it needs time, and time is no longer on their side. The narcissist realizes too late that credibility cannot be demanded. It must be sustained. And once sustained, credibility is lost. It cannot be recovered through performance. This is where the unraveling becomes visible, not dramatic, not explosive, but decisive. Influence drains away, support thins. Responses shorten, invitations stop coming. They are not attacked, they are decentered. They try to return not out of repentance, but fear. They come back when control is slipping, not when understanding dawns, not when conscience awakens, but when the ground beneath them no longer holds. This return is not repentance. It is panic disguised as humility. The narcissist does not return because they finally see you. They return because they can no longer stabilize themselves without you. They feel the collapse tightening. The silence around them has weight. The loss of influence is no longer theoretical. And suddenly, you become important again. Not as a person, not as someone to honor, but as a pressure release. They reach out carefully at first. A soft message, a familiar tone, a reference to the past that implies shared meaning. They test whether access still exists, whether the door is still unlocked. If that fails, the approach escalates. They express regret, but it lacks specificity. They apologize, but without ownership. They speak of pain, but not of harm done. The language sounds right. The timing feels urgent, but the substance is hollow, because fear produces performance, not surrender. True repentance relinquishes control. Fear attempts to regain it. This is the difference the narcissist cannot bridge. They are not asking forgiveness because they accept consequence. They are asking forgiveness to stop consequence. They do not seek restoration. They seek relief, and relief would require you to absorb the pressure once again. This is why the return feels destabilizing to you. Not because you are weak, but because the request itself violates the boundary God established. You were removed to prevent further distortion. To re-enter now would be to interfere with a correction already underway. God does not extract the innocent from collapse, just to return them as a stabilizer. The narcissist believes time has softened the situation. They believe enough damage has occurred to justify a reset. They believe apology can reopen access. They misunderstand what has changed. Access was not revoked because of emotion. It was revoked because of violation, and violation does not expire with time. This is why their return fails. They cannot replicate sincerity, because sincerity requires humility, and humility would require admitting they are not the center of the story. That admission would dismantle the very identity they are trying to preserve. So instead, they offer controlled vulnerability. They curate remorse. They rehearse accountability. But accountability cannot be curated. Reality does not respond to imitation. This is the moment where desperation sharpens into fear. They realize the old strategies no longer work. The door does not open. The response does not come. The emotional leverage is gone, and fear replaces confidence. They feel exposed. They feel cornered. They feel the consequences pressing in without a buffer. They may accuse you of cruelty for holding the boundary. They may frame your distance as unforgiveness. They may appeal to faith itself, invoking grace without submission. But grace is not permission to bypass justice. Grace does not erase consequence. It prepares the ground for transformation, and transformation is not what they are seeking. They are seeking escape. This is why your refusal to re-engage is not hardness of heart. It is alignment. God has already spoken through separation. To return now would be to say the judgment was negotiable. It is not. You are not rejecting a person. You are refusing to re-enter a system that has been dismantled. This is where many people falter, mistaking distance for lack of compassion. But compassion does not always move toward. Sometimes it stands still and allows truth to complete its work. The narcissist's return is the final confirmation that the collapse is real. They would not reach back if control remained intact. They would not seek you if distortion still functioned. Their fear is evidence. Evidence that the unraveling has progressed beyond denial. Evidence that the old structure cannot be restored. Evidence that what God began will not be reversed. And so the boundary holds. Not because you are punishing them, but because God is finishing something you were never meant to stop. The ending is not loud, it is final. There is no final confrontation, no dramatic moment where everything is explained, no closing argument, no public declaration of victory. That is not how divine justice concludes. It ends with separation. One day, often without realizing when it happened, you notice something has changed. Not around them, within you. The urgency is gone. The need to track outcomes dissolves. The impulse to look back fades. You are no longer waiting. Not because justice has finished unfolding, but because your role within it has ended. The narcissist's collapse does not need your attention to continue. It no longer depends on your endurance, your reaction, or your presence. What was disordered has been addressed at a level deeper than circumstance. God does not close chapters with noise. He closes them with alignment. What was removed from your life no longer reaches you. The chaos does not stop existing. It simply no longer crosses into your days. You are not shielded by denial, but by distance. And distance, when ordained, is peace. This is how restoration feels. Not like triumph, not like revenge, but like steadiness. Your mind no longer rehearses what happened. Your body no longer braces for impact. You move forward without carrying responsibility for what follows behind you. That is the mark of justice completed. The narcissist is left within the architecture of their own choices, not as a sentence imposed from above, but as a consequence allowed to stand. Truth, once reintroduced, sustains itself. It does not need witnesses. It does not need reinforcement. It simply remains. And you remain elsewhere, free from explanation, free from defense, free from the system that once required your suffering to function. This is not forgetting. It is release. God's fury does not end with destruction. It ends with order restored. And when order is restored, the faithful are no longer asked to watch. They are asked to live. The chapter closes not with collapse, but with authority. And you move forward without looking back, knowing that what was corrected behind you no longer belongs to your future, and what lies ahead no longer requires you to carry the weight of what was never yours to hold.